Okay, so get this. Have you ever heard of a smell so bad it practically shut down a government?
Can't say I have.
Well, that's the wild story we're diving into today, the Great Stink of London in 1858.
Oh, The Great Stink, a classic.
We've got a ton of fascinating sources to unpack today, articles, historical accounts, even some Charles Dickens.
Ooh, Dickens. Always a good time.
Exactly. So we're going to uncover what caused this infamous stink, how London dealt with it, and the surprising legacy it left behind.
Sounds like a plan. You know, people often forget that this wasn't just a random smelly summer. It actually exposed a much deeper problem that had been brewing for decades.
Really? Like what?
Well, London in the 1850s was this global powerhouse, right? A hub of industry and innovation. But there was one major flaw.
Oh, I see where this is going. Let me guess, the sanitation system.
Bingo. London's sanitation was practically medieval.
So while London was leading the world in so many ways, its plumbing was stuck in the Dark Ages.
Pretty much. And to make matters worse, London's population was exploding.
Exploding. How much are we talking?
From under 1 million to 3 million in just a few decades.
Wow, that's a lot of people. And a lot more waste.
Exactly. More people meant more waste, and the city's infrastructure just couldn't keep up.
Makes sense. And I've read that the Thames River itself had basically become an open sewer.
It was pretty bad. In fact, Dickens described it as a deadly sewer.
Yikes. Not exactly a glowing review.
It wasn't hyperbole either. Scientist Michael Faraday actually dropped pieces of paper into the Thames to test the pollution levels.
Oh no. What happened?
The water was so thick with filth you could actually see it on the surface.
Ugh, okay, I did not need that mental image.
And it gets worse. Sources describe waste piled up 6 feet deep in some places along the riverbanks.
6 feet deep. How did people even function with that kind of stench hanging over the city?
Well, you got to remember, this was a time when people believed in the miasma theory.
The miasma theory. Remind me what that is again.
Basically the idea that bad air caused disease. They called it miasma.
Right. So the smell wasn't just unpleasant, it was terrifying.
Exactly. People genuinely thought the air could kill them.
So imagine you're in London, the heart of the British Empire, surrounded by innovation and progress, but also this fear that the air itself could make you sick.
Must have been pretty unsettling.
And the fear wasn't exactly unfounded. London had already suffered through 3 major cholera outbreaks in the decades before the Great Stink.
Right, and thousands died in those outbreaks. It was a serious public health crisis.
That's where John Snow enters the picture, right? He was doing all that groundbreaking work on cholera at the same time.
Yeah, Snow was a true pioneer, one of the first to challenge that miasma theory.
What did he think was causing it instead?
He was convinced cholera was spread through contaminated water, and his investigation during the 1854 Broad Street outbreak really changed things.
I vaguely remember learning about that in school. Something about a water pump.
That's the one. He was able to pinpoint a single water pump as the source of the outbreak, some of the first real evidence to support his theory.
But if his work was so important, why was it dismissed for so long? You'd think they'd be desperate for any explanation, especially with the city practically drowning in its own waste.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Actually kind of tragic. Snow faced a ton of resistance, even from other doctors.
Why, though?
The miasma theory was just so ingrained. It was hard for people to wrap their heads around a different explanation. But, in a strange way, the Great Stink itself helped shift public opinion.
How so?
Well, it was such a visceral problem, impossible to ignore. It forced people to start questioning things, even those in power.
Like the city needed a giant slap in the face, that overwhelming stench, to finally realize something had to change.
Exactly. The stench was so bad it even disrupted the government.
Really? How?
Well, Queen Victoria cut a river cruise short because the smell was too much.
Can't say I blame her.
And Parliament tried to mask the odor by soaking curtains in lime chloride.
Did it work?
Really? They even considered moving the whole government out of London.
Wow, I bet the newspapers had a field day with that.
They did. And the public was outraged, understandably.
I've got some of those articles here in Punch magazine, too. They really didn't hold back.
It was more than just a smelly inconvenience. It was a public health crisis unfolding in the capital of one of the most powerful empires in the world.
It really puts things into perspective. So this Great Stink wasn't only a health hazard and a social nightmare, it was a political pressure cooker, too. What did the government finally do?
Well, in the midst of all this chaos, the Great Stink created an opportunity for some political maneuvering.
Ooh, I knew it.
Disraeli, the leader of the House of Commons at the time, saw a chance to use the crisis to his advantage.
Of course he did. Classic politics.
He used the public outcry to push through legislation for a complete overhaul of London's sewer system.
Now that's a bold move.
It was, and it set the stage for one of the most ambitious engineering projects in history.
Which brings us to Joseph Bazalgette, the engineer tasked with saving London from its own filth. What can you tell us about this guy?
Bazalgette. Oh, he was a visionary, no question. I mean, imagine being handed this impossible task, fixing London's sewers, and he just took it head on, you know.
And not only did he solve the problem, but his work ended up influencing, like, sanitation practices worldwide. It's crazy.
He was way ahead of his time, and his plan was ambitious, to say the least.
Over 1,100 miles of new sewers. That's insane, like laying pipes from New York to Miami.
It really puts it into perspective, doesn't it? And it wasn't just about adding more sewers. Bazalgette's plan was revolutionary because he separated the sewage from rainwater.
Ah, that makes sense. Before that, it was all just flowing together, right? No wonder the river was such a mess.
Exactly. So instead of everything going straight into the Thames, he came up with a way to divert the sewage.
And send it where?
Well, he designed these massive outfall sewers to carry the waste far away from the city.
So giant underground pipes carrying all that sewage out to sea.
Eastward, actually. Way beyond London's boundaries. Pretty ingenious, if you ask me.
Yeah. Okay, but London's huge, right? Super densely populated. Digging up and rebuilding all those sewers must have been a logistical nightmare. What kind of challenges did he face?
Oh, tons. For one thing, parts of London are actually below the high water mark of the Thames.
What? Like below the river?
Yeah, places like Lambeth and Pimlico.
Yeah.
So Bazalgette had to figure out how to move all that sewage uphill.
Wait, uphill? How do you even do that? Sounds impossible.
He built pumping stations. Think of them like giant elevators for sewage. These powerful pumps lifted the waste up, so it could flow downhill towards those outfall sewers.
So he basically outsmarted gravity. It's no wonder they call him an engineering genius. And I read that he was also big on design, not just function.
Oh, absolutely. The pumping stations at Crossness and Abbey Mills, those are architectural marvels.
Seriously, sewage pumping stations.
No, seriously. Crossness, for example, it's got this stunning Romanesque design and intricate cast iron work. It's more like a cathedral than anything to do with sewage.
Wow, so even sewage pumping stations could be beautiful back then.
They could. And Abbey Mills isn't too shabby either. Ornate brickwork, towering chimneys. It's like something out of a Venetian palazzo.
It's amazing how they took something so essential, but, kind of gross, and turned it into a work of art. Bazalgette must have had a pretty amazing vision.
Oh, he did. This wasn't just about fixing a problem. It was about improving the city, making it better. And that vision went beyond just sewers.
You're talking about the Thames embankments, right? They're so iconic now. Hard to imagine London without them.
But before Bazalgette, those riverbanks were a mess. Industrial wasteland, basically. He saw an opportunity to make them into something beautiful and useful.
So he was killing two birds with one stone, building the sewer lines within the embankment walls, and at the same time, cleaning up the river.
Exactly. And the embankments did so much more. New roadways, which meant less traffic congestion. And they created all this public space where people could walk and relax, enjoy the river.
It's incredible how much he accomplished. Okay, let's talk about the sheer scale of this construction project. Millions of bricks, tons of concrete. The final cost was £6.5 million. That's a crazy amount of money, even today.
It was a massive undertaking, for sure. Especially back then in the 1860s, without all the technology we have today.
Can you imagine trying to coordinate all of that, all those workers and materials, in a city like London?
It's mind-boggling. And Bazalgette wasn't just an engineer. He was a manager, a diplomat, had to deal with strikes, budget problems, even cholera outbreaks, all while keeping this massive project on track.
Talk about a tough job. Makes you wonder how people felt about all this construction going on. Didn't they complain about living next to a giant sewer site?
You'd think so, right? But the press coverage was actually pretty positive. They really understood the importance of what Bazalgette was doing. They even praised the workers.
It's kind of refreshing to hear about a time when people understood that investing in public infrastructure was important, even if it meant some temporary inconvenience.
It is. There's a lesson in there somewhere, for sure. So many infrastructure projects today just get bogged down with negativity. Bazalgette's story shows that when people have a common goal, they can work together to achieve amazing things.
So after years of work, Bazalgette's system was finally finished. Did it actually solve the problem? Well, the data's pretty clear. The biggest immediate impact: No more cholera outbreaks in London.
Like flipping a switch. Remember that outbreak in '66? The one limited to that little pocket of the East End?
Yeah, the part that wasn't connected to Bazalgette's system yet.
Proof positive, right. John Snow's theory playing out in real time. Once the whole city was on the new system, cholera vanished. Poof.
Gone. Just like that. It's amazing to think this system, built over 150 years ago, it's still working today for over 8 million people.
That's Bazalgette for you. Solid engineering built to last. But it does make you think, right? How are cities dealing with all this old infrastructure today? Especially as they keep growing.
Yeah, did Bazalgette ever imagine his creation would still be running all these years later? I mean, he solved the problem of his time, but then new ones pop up, right?
Always. That's progress, isn't it?
Yeah.
Building on what came before, learning from mistakes, from successes, just like Bazalgette did.
And speaking of learning, it's great that some of his original work is still around. The pumping stations, Crossness, and Abbey Mills, they're museums now, right?
They are. Definitely worth a visit if you're ever in London. It's like stepping back in time, seeing how they did things. Kind of ironic, though, isn't it?
What's that?
These structures, they used to be symbols of something so, well, gross, sewage. But now they're admired for their beauty, their ingenuity.
It's almost poetic, right? Turning something awful into something amazing. Bazalgette's legacy, it's more than just bricks and pipes.
For sure. He's a reminder that we can solve big problems, even the really messy ones, if we put our minds to it.
So, wrapping up here, why should we in the 21st century care about the Great Stink?
It's a story about connections, infrastructure, public health, the environment. Ignore those and you're in trouble. But with some creativity, some hard work, we could overcome anything, like Bazalgette did.
It makes you wonder what problems we have today that might lead to some crazy new solutions in the future, right?
Right. The Great Stink might be a distant memory, but its lessons are still relevant today. For all of us.
Couldn't agree more. If you're interested in learning more, there's tons of stuff online. Documentaries, articles, all about Bazalgette and his work. Check it out.
And remember, even the worst problems can lead to amazing progress. Who knows what we'll come up with next?
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Great Stink of London. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those sewers flowing.